So welcome and thank you for having us today. My name's Carrie Peterson. With me today, I have Katie Fensky and Brianna Morales. They are going to be presenting with me today on the topic of selecting first words to teach young children with autism. So before we get started, I'll just share very briefly, I'm a speech language pathologist for about 30 and a few years. I'm also a board certified behavior analyst. In that role, I oversee the Applied Behavior Analysis Program, or ABA program, at Kaufman Children's Center. Katie and Brianna are two dedicated speech language pathologists. So they both did their clinical fellow year with me under my supervision, and they both worked as ABA technicians within our ABA program. And they have been working for the last few years with all of the children who are enrolled in our ABA program. So I look forward to having them share some of our content today. So Katie, you can just give a wave, and Brianna. And I will just review our objectives for today. So our objectives for today are to review what the research shows us and tells us about what words are learned first in the first few years of life. And we're going to consider some choices for selecting first words for young children with autism who may have limited or no communication. We're going to evaluate the benefit of allowing a neurotypical development guide towards selecting those first words. And we're also going to consider some potential limitations of choosing first words to teach that don't follow a developmental sequence.
ABA providers such as BCBAs or behavior analysts and speech therapists likely have different words that they use to describe communication and language. So for example, speech therapists often use the term receptive language, and ABA uses the term listener skills. But both of these terms describe the behavior of how a child understands spoken language. Both ABA and speech therapists are interested in and work with a child on expressive language skills that they need to comment or to label and to request. Both are also likely to work on a child's social communication skills, which an SLP might refer to as pragmatic skills. And then for a young child with ASD, communication goals will likely include improving their ability to understand language, to express or use their language, to imitate the speech of others, and very importantly, to request the things that they want or need in their environment. So to develop a child's receptive language skills, their goals might include working on responding to their name when they're called, or following simple directions like, come over here, or can you go get your shoes? And then attending to other people or objects in their environment. Maybe they'll work on pointing to their body parts or pointing to familiar people or common nouns in pictures. And then to develop their language expression, a child's goals will include improving their ability to comment or label things in their environment, and to improve their social communication skills. So they might work on saying hi and bye to other people. And a child's early vocabulary is very tied to the things and the people and the places that they encounter frequently. So since every child's environment is different based on their culture and their home makeup, the words that are most meaningful to them might not be meaningful to another child. Children often also gain attention or even gain preferred items from adults when they use their language. So maybe a child says the word ball and their caregiver says, that's right, it's a ball, and it gives them lots of praise and excitement. Or maybe the adult gives them the ball, so then they get to play with it. And in both of those cases, they are improving their social communication skills by involving someone else in an interaction. It's also important to understand that first words are often used for different reasons or have different functions. So for example, if a child sees their mother enter a room and they say, "Mama," then they're likely commenting that their mom came in the room. And then if their mom leaves the room, then maybe they say, "Mama," and that's indicating that they want to know where she went. So mama is used in those two cases for different reasons. And the adults in a child's life can derive the meaning of their words from based on the context that they're used in. And then, so we just want to show you a short clip of a 2-year-old girl who's commenting in her environment.
Oh, apples. Oh, a flower. Oh, a tree. Oh, a butterfly. Oh.
So then in developing speech, meaning the ability to say words clearly, children often learn to say words that are easiest for them to produce first, like mama or dada or ball. And then as they become better able to produce more sounds, their ability to imitate more and more words will also improve. Children strive to match what others in their environment are saying and to say those words more accurately. So they'll expand their language based on the language they hear others using. However, the ability to expand their language is dependent upon their ability to imitate what others are saying. So if a child's speech production or speech imitation skills are very limited, then it will limit their ability to expand their language from using words onto phrases and onto sentences. And then requesting is a very important communication skill because it helps get the child it helps the child get what they want. It pairs caregivers or whoever they're communicating with good things. And it establishes that when we need or want something, we must seek out another person and interact with them in some way. Oftentimes, children with ASD might take a parent or caregiver's hand and lead them over to a location where they know something that they want is kept, or maybe they take the caregiver's hand and place it on something to indicate that they want it opened. Those are both ways that a child might request. So the child gains desired items by demonstrating acceptable ways of requesting. And our goal is that by helping them develop effective ways to request, then they don't have to rely on less desirable behaviors like crying or whining or grabbing to get the things they want. So because requesting is such a powerful communication skill, a lot of the time a child's first words will be their favorite snacks or toys or activities. And SLPs are often the first person that might be working with a child with communication delays, and maybe they have an ASD diagnosis already, or there's a concern. But those children will benefit directly from gaining requesting skills by using appropriate ways to get what they want and what they need. So if a child can imitate speech, then the SLP and the other adults in their life will model words for them and then give them lots of reinforcement when they use those words or when they attempt to imitate those words. However, when a child does not successfully imitate the speech of others, then an alternative way of expressing their wants and their needs must be considered. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brianna.
So if a child is not imitating words or using words on their own, we consider and select an augmentative and alternative communication method, which we abbreviate to as AAC. And that will allow the child to be able to request to have their needs and wants met, until which time they begin to imitate words. There are many different AAC methods that may be chosen for a child based on that child's needs, their skill level, the type of training the child's SLP has, and parent preferences. And which method to select is a really important decision as well, but it's not within the scope of this presentation. Today, we are focusing on what words are chosen within an AAC system and not the system of communication itself. But we will briefly review the different AAC options that may be selected. Whatever method is selected, it's always best practice for the parents to understand how to also work on requests in the same way at home and in other environments. And it's important that the child can generalize requesting skills across different settings, and that the system is increasing their communication skills and independence at home. For this reason, it's important that the parent's input is considered when you're thinking about what communication system will work best for the child and the parents together. So the first method of communication I'm going to talk about is the use of manual signs. Many children are successful learning manual signs as their first words, and there is significant research to support teaching signs. Many children are taught simple signs, and many begin to imitate spoken words over time. And learning signs helps a child to attend to and imitate the motor skills of others. So in doing so, children often begin to attend more to the motor behavior of speaking, and they attempt to imitate words. Manual signs have advantages as a low-tech method of communication that does not require the child to carry an item or manage pictures, and the signs that a child uses are always portable and with them. So we've seen many children with ASD learn manual signs as a bridge to vocal communication at our center. And then another frequently used method is picture exchange communication system, which is often referred to as PECS. And this is where the child is systematically taught to select small laminated pictures from a book and then hand the picture of the item they want to another person in exchange for the item they are requesting. So the child has a book of pictures with all their favorite items, and then the child must find the picture that they want and give that picture to the adult to indicate their preferences. Research has also proven PECS to provide an effective way for a child to communicate, and that child may also begin to use spoken words. And then lastly, another type of AAC method is the use of a speech generating device. And this is often a tablet with an AAC application. And this device is used by the child to communicate their wants and needs by touching the picture or a word on a screen. And the AAC device may also be used to model language for the child by the adults who are around them. Most often, the words on an AAC application are pre-selected, and they may not include the nouns and verbs that reflect an individual child's specific preferences. So we're going to show two videos now of a child who attended our ABA program. And within a previous ABA program in which he was enrolled and through his school, he had been taught to use PECS and then an AAC device. And when he started within our program, he was completely nonverbal, and he was 5 years old, and his parents reported that he was not using either PECS or his AAC device readily to communicate. He was able to imitate some motor actions, and we taught him manual signs to request his favorite things, which he learned very quickly. And these videos show some of the early work with him on learning to sign, to request swing and cookie, which were two of his favorite things.
Cookie. Cookie.
Oh no, you're too open. Swing. Swing. All right, nice. Oh no.
So for that child, manual signs were a more effective way for him to communicate his wants and needs. And he used signs often at home, and he generalized these really well. And he is now able to speak in full sentences to communicate his ideas, his wants, and his needs. And this is a short video of a child using a picture exchange to request a pretzel. This child had been taught to use this method through his previous ABA provider and through his school. And then once enrolled in our ABA program, we also taught him some signs, and ultimately he used a combination of manual signs and an AAC generating device. And then here is a video of a child who uses both manual signs and a speech generating AAC device. This child was taught some signs to request her favorite items, and the iPad was an AAC method that was introduced because motor imitation skills were limited. And one of her favorite things is shaving cream as sensory play. So a picture of shaving cream was put onto her device along with some of her other favorite things. And in this video, you'll see her request shaving cream using her device. This video shows one of her first attempts at using her AAC device. So you will notice that she clicks on the picture of shaving cream multiple times. But since we worked on having her click on items that she requests only once.
Shaving cream. Shaving cream.
The next thing we're going to talk about is deciding which words or vocabulary we choose to teach first. So we know that parents, caregivers, teachers, speech pathologists, and behavior analysts are going to be thinking about what words are going to best meet the child's needs. And we know through our clinical practice, and maybe you are going to come to realize that there can be some pretty significant differences of opinion across providers and settings about what words make sense to teach first. I think it's important to understand where some of these differences of opinions come from so that as parents and as clinicians, we can better advocate for individual children in our care. Because the first words that we decide to teach a child can have a significant impact on how and why they communicate in the future. It can also impact their ability to develop additional communication skills like labeling items or understanding the meaning of words. So let's take some time to think about how and why these decisions are made, which first words might meet the child's needs best. And as clinicians, and for myself as a speech language pathologist and a behavior analyst, I'm always looking to rely on evidence-based practice. So we have to consider that. And it's important for us as clinicians and as parents to know that parent perspective and values is an essential component of what constitutes evidence-based practice. So it's very important as parents to understand some of these differences, make your opinions, and then be able to communicate those to the clinicians that are serving your child. So sometimes a speech pathologist or a teacher may decide that it makes sense to teach a child specific nouns or verbs to communicate their first requests, the things the child would want to ask for. So that might include things like ball or cracker or blocks or shoe or jump. Other clinicians may come from a set of beliefs that result in them suggesting the child be taught a more general word or a function word, such as more or please or want or finished. So these two thought processes are very different, and they come from some research where we're able to identify two different types of words that exist among all of us. So this research goes back several decades, and it really distinguishes between two types of words within our daily usage. And one set of words we refer to as core vocabulary. Core vocabulary comprise the words that we use the most often. They're a very small set of words compared to all the words that we have. So if we think about, most of us have about 10,000 words in our vocabulary, the ones we use the most often is a much smaller set. So it's important to know that the initial sample groups that were used to identify core vocabulary were all adults and adolescents. So fringe vocabulary on the other side are much larger set of words, but they're a much less frequently used words. So for example, if I think about words associated with food, I'm only using those words around the contexts in which they're meaningful. So this afternoon, for example, I used the word salad. I probably haven't used it all day, and I probably won't use it again, maybe for several days. On the other hand, the words like the and it are used many, many times a day. So fringe vocabulary refers to all of the hundreds of nouns like people, places, and verbs and describing words. For example, this afternoon, the person ordering my salad said, "Do you like the walnuts or not?" And walnuts would probably be a word I would never say again for several weeks, maybe until I ordered the salad, or maybe until I was making banana bread and was asking the person if they liked walnuts in it or not. So let's recall the video of the neurotypical 2-year-old child naming nouns in a book. We know that specific nouns and verbs occupy a lot of what a typical 2-year-old is using, because they're learning all of those nouns and verbs so that later they can begin to combine them the way we combine words into sentences. So just to summarize, core words or core vocabulary are high frequency, smaller number of words, and they tend to be more abstract and function-based. And fringe words are specific nouns, verbs, and describing words. And they reflect a much bigger set of words that we have by the time we've established all of the vocabulary. So let's look just for a minute about when we're looking at augmentative or alternative communication methods, what are we more likely to see a speech pathologist, a teacher, or a behavior analyst recommend to be used as those first words that we teach a child with limited communication? When we're teaching manual signs, we might see within our center, for example, we always start with specific nouns and verbs or fringe words. I've encountered many children who come to our center who have worked with a previous speech language pathologist who thought very differently and taught manual signs, however, taught the child to sign more or please or want. So the method of AAC selected with regard to manual signs is probably not going to dictate with clarity whether or not the clinician is deciding to teach core or fringe words. Picture Exchange Communication System, or PECS, starts with fringe words or specific nouns and verbs that reflect the items that the child most likes and wants. When we look at an AAC communication device that has an application, most of those are very heavily reflective of core words. In fact, most of what you'll see on there, pardon me, are core words. And we'll take a look at a sample of a first homepage on an AAC device. So again, the type of method may not dictate whether or not core or fringe are being taught with regard to manual signs. PECS is likely to be starting first words with fringe words that are specific nouns and verbs. And an AAC device is likely to have a large number of core words as the first words that are being taught. So let's look at this question. Can core vocabulary be identified among young children? So there's a study that attempted to identify core vocabulary, meaning the words used with the greatest frequency, for children between 2 and 3. The children were all recorded and language samples were analyzed to see what are the words that these children are using the most often. And what they found was not surprising. Much like adults, children who have language skills reflective of a typical 3-year-old or even 2-year-old use words like I and no and that and more and go and some more often than they use specific nouns and verbs. So these words were used to identify a potential set of core vocabulary for preschool age children. So let's talk about some limitations with regard to this. We know that the children in the study had neurotypical language skills. We know they were Caucasian and from a similar socioeconomic background. The sample was only collected in a daycare setting, so the children had exposure to the same nouns and materials within that setting. Did not include any cultural differences that might have been seen in terms of vocabulary in their own home. So we know that because these children were developing on schedule, they already had hundreds of words that they learned through the natural experiences within the meaningful context of those activities, so that they learned colors and they learned words like blocks and ball. The children in the study probably had very different skills compared to the children with autism who have not yet developed first words. So very briefly, I'm just going to talk about some of the skills that we can assume these children had. In terms of their understanding of language, they could probably identify many body parts, follow multiple step directions. They could identify items not just by noun, like point to the ball, but they could point to them by a description of a feature. Can you show me the one that has wheels, for example? And a child by 2.5 would point to a car from an array of pictures. Or which one do you use to drink? And the child can understand that means to point to the picture of the cup. The child could also probably point to parts of a whole. So for example, if I said, could you point to the tail on the cow? The child could make that discrimination and point to that versus the tail on a horse. So we could keep going and look at all of the skills that these children probably had. They probably had 400 to 1,000 words in their vocabulary. They were probably beginning to ask questions like, what's that? And where's my truck? They used two-word phrases likely to indicate they didn't want to do something, like no bath. They were starting to probably use some plurals and combine words like mommy, open juice. So I think it's just important for us to think about that the children within the study where we identified core vocabulary did not really share the same set of skills as the children were describing. So young children with autism and limited communication probably have very few of those skills in their repertoires yet. So the researcher himself makes an important statement in the discussion, and he says that the words identified as core for toddlers who are not disabled may or may not be appropriate for use by toddlers with expressive communication delays. So another study that was done, which was very similar, took place in Australia and essentially yielded the same results. And this researcher also reminds us that it's of importance to consider the individual needs, interests, and communication style of the child who's going to use the alternative or augmentative communication system to make sure that the vocabulary is in fact useful and appropriate for that particular child, and even goes further to say, these children require individualized fringe vocabulary that reflects their personalities, interests, in the contexts in which they interact. So another paper that I'd like to just sort of summarize briefly examined 13 mother-child dyads of children diagnosed with autism between 26 and 76 months. And they ranged from having no words to single words to those who were combining words. And there were 60-minute interactions that were audio taped during daily routines. And then the characteristics of what mother said and what child said were analyzed and compared to include how many of those words did mom and child both produce. And the results indicated that the mother's use of words was very dependent on the language development of the child. In other words, when the child is very young and only using a few words, mother is using a lot of those nouns as well and limiting some of those function words. So the results really indicate that children with developmental delays, including autism, develop first words in a way very similar as neurotypical children. And the research really suggests that vocabulary targets for children with autism at early phases of spoken language should be selected from the words that the caregivers use with their children during spontaneous interactions rather than from core vocabulary lists. So what is this saying? It's saying that when we have a child who's an early communicator, we should be building vocabulary around the experiences that are meaningful to them, which are largely within play and daily routines. So this is another very recent paper from the journal Augmentative and Alternative Communication. And I just want to share, there are a couple of important things within this paper. And the first one is that despite really significant advances in technology with regard to augmentative and alternative communication, and having looked at a device myself today, I'm really shocked at how elaborate these can be. The field continues to rely on design of communication boards from the 1980s. And then despite its widespread use, there is currently no published research that supports the effectiveness of core vocabulary as a means to enhance language learning for young children who use an augmentative communication device. So let's think about which words seem useful and appropriate for a young child with limited communication, and which group of words likely reflects the child's interests in the context with which they interact with them. So this is an example of an early core 36. So these would be the words that a child might be exposed to in early communication treatment sessions. And these might be some fringe words if the inclination of the speech pathologist or behavior analyst or teacher was working with them might choose to teach first. So before we keep going, I know that's a lot of information, and I'm going to get to more of the implications about how does this guide our practice. But I just want to answer any questions that there might be with regard to understanding the term to describe core versus fringe words. So Hatal, maybe you can tell me if there's any questions that you think I can address.
Sure. There's actually no questions right now in the chat. So if anything comes up, I'll be sure to note it and let you know towards the end of the presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you. So this is a paper that came out very recently, and it is a doctoral candidate at, I believe, Penn State University. And this paper was very sort of spoke to what I've experienced in my own practice in 30 plus years, both as a speech pathologist and as a behavior analyst. And having worked with this population, young children with autism, for over 2 decades, this paper was very interesting to me and kind of gave some, I think, support to some of the thought processes that I have around how do we choose first words. So the title is Core Vocabulary Lists for Young Children and Considerations for Early Language Development. So this was a narrative review. So one of the main things we have to understand is many clinicians report they consider prioritizing core words during the vocabulary selection process. It's not known whether an emphasis on core words, however, will best meet the expressive vocabulary needs of early symbolic communicators. So these are children who are not yet using words. So the question posed by the individual was, how do the words on core vocabulary lists that are often used for early language learners compare to the words on validated inventories of early communication skills of young children? So one validated measure of first words is the MacArthur-Bates Communicative Development Inventory. And this is a parent report inventory. As a speech pathologist, I used this a lot in early intervention. It's normed on over 1,000 infants and 1,400 toddlers. It's reliable and validated both for children with and without developmental delays. It accounts for what words a child uses and understands. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a very quick peek at what some of these first words are. So they're animal sounds, not surprising. And I'll skip that slide. They're also names of animals, foods and drinks, vehicles, toys that a child might experience. And so what the MacArthur inventory tells us is that despite some variability, there's a lot of consistency in terms of what words are learned first. And in English language vocabularies of young children, 18 months to 36 months are largely dominated by nouns, so people, animals, and foods. Animal sounds and sound effects and words within social routines are produced within 50% of children among the first 50 words they acquire. So those would be sounds like the car going vroom or meow. Even if the child isn't able to do the full word for meow, they might do wah wah for a dog barking. So young children, we know, produce words for purposes of requesting, commenting, rejecting, participating in routines well before they start to combine words into phrases. And function words are not common in children's early word use for the most part. There are a few. So let's look at how the words on core vocabulary lists compare to words on validated inventory of early communication skills. So what they found was there's very little overlap of first words. Approximately 80% of the words that a child produces first are not found on core vocabulary lists. So the cloud to the right, those are a lot of the first words a child might learn from birth to 36 months. And on the right, we see how many of those overlap with that first 100 core vocabulary words. So there's very little overlap when we look at vocabulary for a child who's under 3. So what does this tell us? That core vocabulary, or those high function words, do not reflect early vocabulary acquisition or preferences and experiences of a young child. Function words are not used until they're combining words and using grammar markers. The ability to combine those words is going to rely upon a robust vocabulary of those nouns and verbs like dog and cat and red and apple. So core vocabulary, we can sort of assume, may not probably, core or fringe alone will probably not meet the individual needs of a child with autism with limited communication. So we're probably going to be thoughtful about how we choose a balance of these words when we're teaching a young child to communicate. So I wanted to, I'm not a researcher, I am a clinician. I love being with the children. I love getting in and helping them work on communication. But I wanted to do my own little mini research. So I pulled the data from 3 of the children who were within our ABA program. When they began, all of them were nonverbal. They had no speech, no communication. They were all taught manual signs to request their favorite items. And I pulled the first 25 words that they were taught. And these might have been manual signs. They might have included once the child began to use words. And I made a list of those for each of the children. And then I wanted to cross-reference the core vocabulary list for preschoolers and see how many of those could be found in the first 25 or so words that these children learned. And what we can see is exactly what the research tells us, and that is these children are learning first words much like typical neurotypical children are learning them, just on a different time frame. So how does this guide our practice within our clinic? We teach the child to first request their favorite things using whatever method is best for them. And the first words we select are not dependent upon the method of communication. So whether a child is taught to use manual signs to request their favorite items, or the child uses a picture exchange to request their favorite items, or an AAC device, we always start with their favorites. And that largely always is nouns and verbs. We never teach first words that are general function words like please and want and more. We combine our clinical expertise, research within the fields of behavior analysis and speech and language. We teach specific nouns and verbs to establish affecting requesting skills. Then we begin to combine those verbs with the specific nouns associated with them. So we teach eat cookie, drink water, read book, before we start to teach I want as a carrier phrase. We teach most core words within the developmental sequence in which they're acquired based on the child's needs. So we absolutely do teach core vocabulary, and core vocabulary is very important. We teach it at the point in time when the child would more likely be acquiring some of those words. So I want to show a couple of videos. This is the same child who was signing to get cookie and signing on the swing. He, at this point, is showing us that he can also use signs to label familiar pictures. So he's going to label the slide, which was one of his favorite things in the motor room, and a picture of his dad. And here he still has no vocal communication.
Slide. Who's this? Dad.
Okay. So here he is, just a couple of more. He's labeling. In other words, Brianna is showing him a picture of a puzzle, and he's labeling it with a sign, and a picture of someone painting, and he's going to label those both.
Puzzle, yeah. And what do they do? Paint. You got it, smart boy. You're so good at that.
So here, the child has been with us for about 9 months. He's really started to, he's worked a lot with the speech language pathologist. He's now talking. He's beginning to be ready to combine words. He has a lot of nouns and verbs in his repertoire and colors, and he has some size words. So Katie now, who's working with him as his speech pathologist, is starting to fold in some of these core vocabulary words. So he's going to work on using the words put on to put on the parts of the potato head. And I've watched this video at least 30 times and probably more. And last evening was the first time that it occurred to me, if you listen the very last time, he's been practicing saying put on eyes, put on nose, put on ears, depending on which potato head piece Katie gives him. The very last time he adds I put on. So it was very interesting to me that he spontaneously added the pronoun I, even though that wasn't directly taught.
Let's see. What do we need to do?
Ice.
Put on ice.
Put on ice.
Good job. Go for it. Put on ice. Good job. Let's see. What do we do next? Put on nose.
Put on nose.
Good job. Put on nose. Good work. Here, you gotta hold on. Good job. What should we do next? Put on ear.
Put on ear.
Good job. Way to go, Chase. What should we do next?
I put on ear.
Put on ear. Wait.
Okay. So I don't know if you could hear that he said, I put on ears.
Let's.
So here we're working on expanding social greetings. So he can say all the names of the people that are really important in his life. And I want to just stop for a moment. This child was on autism spectrum. He also had significant apraxia of speech. So he had a very difficult time imitating the speech of others. So a lot of work was done 3 or 4 times a week, helping him be able to imitate consonants, vowels, simple combinations of those, following the apraxia methods that are used within our center. So this is a speech session. He's already using words, and now we're expanding. Instead of just working on saying hi, we want him to combine hi with the person's name so that when he sees them in the natural environment, he can spontaneously greet them by name.
All right. Can you say, hi, Dad?
Hi, Dad.
Good job. Hi, Mom.
Hi.
You got it. Hi, Abby.
Hi, Abby.
Way to go. Hi, Grandma.
Hi. Hi, Grandma.
Good job.
And the last video of, second to last video of him, we were working on some things and he noticed this large book. And so Katie prompts him to say, I want big book. And we want, instead of pairing that I want in front of everything, we really work on the verb that goes with the noun. So we wanted him to work on, I want to read big book, or I want to drink some water. So that's why she's doing some expanding of language with him in this interaction. And you'll see how much he struggles to get the whole thing out, and that Katie does a great job of sort of chunking it in 2 to 3 word pieces from a speech motor standpoint so he can try to get it himself.
Look at this big book.
Big book.
Tell me.
I want big book.
Yeah. Can you tell me? I want to read big book.
I want to read. I want to read. I want to read big book.
Good job. Read big book. Wow, let's open up.
So the last video, this was shortly before he exited our program. He had continued to make good progress. It was one of his last weeks with us, and his ABA technician, it was her birthday. And he wanted to sing happy birthday and pretend that this cake was for her. And it's
Hey, let's sing.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Desmond. Happy birthday to you. Yay.
So let's talk a little bit about how we expand using CORE with an AAC device. This is a child who was initially taught manual signs within our ABA program. No vocal communication, no words. She had very good understanding of language compared to her ability to communicate expressively. She learned many signs very quickly. And then it was apparent that we couldn't keep up with her, and we really wanted to get her communicating in a way that she was able to, that maybe sign might have been difficult with so many words that she was ready to start combining. So here you're going to see she's using an AAC device, and she's saying, I want to play TV, which is a smart TV, and some of her favorite alphabet games that are on there.
Again, what do you want to play?
Want to play TV.
Hey, sure. Let's turn it on. Again.
So here she's going to, this is video that I was so excited because neither of us knew that this child was capable. This was a substitute technician working with her, although she's been with us for about 4 years. The technician's very experienced. We didn't know that she was able to demonstrate the skill she's about to demonstrate. So she asks for a CNC, and the technician, there's 2 behind the technician. She reaches and gives her one. And what I love most about this video, this child's first inclination is not to push the CNC away because she actually wanted the other CNC. Her first inclination is to say no on her AAC device, and then she pushes the item away. And then she's able to say yes when the technician says, did you mean this CNC?
Want to play. Spin and say.
All right, let me find the spin and say. Here it is.
No.
Oh. Do you want this one?
Yes.
Here you go. There's the spin and say.
So I want to just demonstrate that this is a child who has probably 100 signs in her repertoire. So she's usually able to have her needs met if her AAC device isn't readily available. And this just demonstrates that when she's asked by the ABA technician, can you show me the sign for dog? She's able to do that really readily. And she does still use a combination of signs, but her AAC device is always with her and she uses it readily, both at home and within our setting.
Can you show me the sign for dog? Yeah. Okay. So again, as clinicians, we are always looking at evidence-based practice and what does that mean to inform our treatment sessions. So we're looking at external scientific evidence and we're relying on our clinical expertise and expert opinion, and also very importantly on client, patient, caregiver perspectives and values. And that for me is parent priorities and preferences. Ultimately, we're looking to provide the highest quality services that reflect the interest, values, and needs and choices of the individuals we serve. So for me, as a speech pathologist, I've worked 15 or so years in the educational setting and early childhood special education, elementary education, and I've worked in a clinical setting for quite some time. And so I think it's important that we as clinicians, teachers, we are really helping parents to understand so that they can advocate for their child. And for me personally, this topic I'm very interested in, and I feel somewhat strongly about that this really needs to be a conversation between parent and speech pathologist, behavior analyst, or early childhood teacher. And by sharing some of this information, hopefully parents will feel that they can advocate on behalf of their children if they decide they have potentially a different opinion about what direction to take for first words. So let me share with you some of the challenges that we've seen when we have children, and we have children who come into our center from other ABA programs, from an early childhood program like Early On or special education. And some of the things that we see when children are taught core vocabulary first, we've seen children who will say or sign or select, I want, as a generalized memorized response without being able to select or request a specific item. So I personally had a child not that long ago that was taught to say, the child had some word approximations, and they were taught to say what sounded more like awa. And so the child would come, you know, if you had something that the child liked, they would just say, I want, I want, I want. And it didn't really result in being able to provide them with something specific. It just let you know that you better start getting things and offering them to the child because they must want something, but we didn't know what they wanted. We've also had children that come in and they say or sign more. I think more is probably one of the most common signs that children might be taught first. And we would probably say that it's not a sign we would teach as a first word. The reason is that if I'm interacting with the child, having a lot of fun, blowing bubbles, and the child signing more, and I blow more bubbles, and then the child signs more and I blow more bubbles. And then I get out two other toys that I know that the child in the past has really enjoyed. Maybe I get a ball toy out and the child signs more. I still have no idea which of the two activities the child would like to engage in. So while we, again, we do teach children to use the word more, we just don't teach it as a first word. We also know that a child that's taught more, please, want, they may not develop the listener or receptive skills that support increased independence because the vocabulary is very abstract. So I'll use the example of shoe. Shoe is often a word that's one of the first words we teach. Why? Because it's a very important item that the child has to request in order to be able to go outside and play. Or in our setting, they have to request their shoe to be taken off to go into our motor room, which is a really preferred place for most of our children. So we can teach shoe as a request, whether we're teaching it as a word or we're teaching it as a sign. And then I can also work on having that child follow the directions, get your shoes, give me your shoe. And I can also teach the child to label the shoe. So it's important that sometimes if we teach a word like more, there isn't really a way to point to a more. There's no sort of specific object that would reflect the concept of more. So just in terms of summary statements, the first word selection for a child with autism who does not yet communicate is really important. Children and parents are often relying on others to select those first words. And there's significant difference of opinion around which of these words we should teach first. Decisions made around which words to teach should be made carefully and based upon related research. All of the members of the child's team should be working together with shared goals related to the communication, and there should really be agreement. Parent input is critical in considering evidence-based practice. Parent report is more likely to capture the vocabulary needs for an individual child based on their preferences, environment, and culture. So we might consider a list of the child's favorites within their daily activities and experiences as important first words to teach. And we might want to consider waiting to teach core vocabulary words once the child has a foundation of nouns, verbs, and describing words in their repertoire. If you'd like any specific information on what was shared today, I'm happy for you to contact me by email. Or if you have questions just in general, I'm happy to receive emails regarding those as well. And I wish you the best. I hope it was helpful information, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for your time.